I slammed my truck to a stop and almost jumped out of my skin. There, blocking the only road to my ranch, was an ugly wooden fence with a big yellow sign screaming "Out trespassing." My hands shook as I stared, unsure if I was dreaming. They were trying to lock me out of my own land. I am a rancher, not a criminal. So why was I staring at a fence built overnight blocking the only road to my property? The morning sun was barely above the horizon, and already I was sweating from anger. They'd done it while I slept. Before I could even grab the telephone, my phone rang. I answered on the second ring. It was my wife, calling from inside the house. Her voice was panicked on the other end. "I just saw what you sent me. Is that for real? What happened to the gate?" "I don't know yet, I yelled back, motioning at the fence. "I'm out here and there's a fence blocking the entire road. It must be the HOA. They went crazy and put up a fence overnight." My words cut off as I realized how nuts that sounded even to me. For crying out loud, John. Calm down, she said, trying to reason me down. Who would do that? That's exactly what I'm trying to figure out, I muttered, lunging at the bar of the fence and pushing against it. But it wouldn't budge. The wood felt solid, as if it had been bolted in just a few hours ago by some angry contractor. In that moment, all the frustration of the last year came boiling up in me. Ever since they expanded the subdivision around my property and appointed those HOA bullies, everything had been a battle. I'd refused to kowtow to them, and apparently, they had decided the only way to win was to cordon me off. "This is insane," I said to the empty air, as if the field of cows beyond the fence might answer. The horses whinnied at their barn down the drive, oblivious to the crisis. I took a deep breath and said, "All right, calm, think." I glanced at the rising sun, at the path I'd been walking for 15 years. It belonged to me, all 120 acres of it, and I had every right to cross it. Nobody was supposed to fence it off. Not on my watch. Without another word, I dialed the sheriff's non-emergency number. 911 was only for emergencies, and in my mind, this counted. I needed backup. I got an operator who sighed when she heard my story. "Officer Davis is on his way," the operator finally said, not sounding thrilled. I heard the click as she hung up, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. While I waited, I paced back and forth, enraged. The ranch road was lonely this early. The only sounds were the birds, and my heavy footsteps. When Deputy Davis finally rolled up behind my truck, lights off of course, I was leaning on the fence, staring at that stupid sign. He was a tall guy in his mid-30s, chewing on an energy bar wrapper as he stepped out. "Sir, looks like you're having a rough morning," he said. "You bet I am," I snapped. "Did you see this? The HOA just built this fence overnight. They locked the gate. They're holding my ranch hostage." Deputy Davis raised an eyebrow. He scratched his stubble and turned to examine the fence. "HOA, huh? Interesting. You sure it's the HOA's doing, not some prank by kids?" His tone wasn't belittling, just trying to narrow it down. "No, this is deliberate." I pointed at the hand-painted letters on the sign. "Did you see that lettering? That's HOA style. Besides, the local kids know better than to touch my farm road. They use the main highway, and we've had no trouble from them." He nodded slowly, glancing around the scene. The fence had a sort of patchwork look, like a cheap fix. "All right, I'll see what can be done," he said. I let out a sigh of relief. "Can you make them take it down?" I asked urgently. He shook his head gently. "This isn't criminal. It's a civil matter, property dispute. HOA might be jerks, but unless there's visible danger or something illegal like kidnapping, we can't just unbuild a fence on command. You'll have to sort it out with them, or get a lawyer." Stupid technicalities. My blood boiled. The first thing I thought was, we're talking about my land, my only access home. This was an urgent blockade, not just a party favor. But the deputy was already backing to his cruiser. I stomped my foot. He held up a hand. "Look, I'm sorry, but this is beyond my pay grade. If it's on your property, it's civil. You might want to talk to a lawyer. Meanwhile, do you have another way off your property? Something must be off the main road, right? If you're trapped, I can have a tow line come get your truck out." He definitely thought I was being dramatic about being locked in. I didn't bother explaining the full details. Instead I just spat, "I'll figure it out," and watched him drive off. I stood alone again, looking up at the chain link and wood. The fence had a faded chain link bottom, and freshly installed wooden slats at the top, like they poured leftover materials on a whim. Whoever did this had wasted no time. Now what? The entire circle of road leading into my ranch was sealed. I could see my fields beyond the fence, cows grazing, horses milling, but I couldn't get to them, or even reach the house. For all I knew, my family was wandering around confused in the house, door locked behind them with no way to get out either. I felt a surge of fear. If the fence was meant to lock me in or out, it needed to come down, and I was done waiting. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Rebecca, my old neighbor from before the HOA. "Call me ASAP," it said. I tapped it, dialing her number. We'd bonded after my wife and I moved here, before the development. Now she lived outside the HOA land, but she often visited. Rebecca picked up after a few rings. "John? Are you okay?" I heard some commotion. I saw the sheriff's car. "I'm fine," I said, voice a little calmer than it felt. "Sort of. They just built a fence across the road to my ranch. It looks like the HOA did it." "Shut the what? Are you kidding me? They put a fence on your property. That's illegal." "They sure did," I agreed. "I tried to get the deputy to do something, but he says it's civil, says I need a lawyer." Rebecca scoffed. "Of course, they'll say that." "John, have you been in any disputes with the HOA lately? Did you do anything they'd consider a violation?" I thought. "Not really. You know I'm not even technically in the HOA. I own 120 acres around it. I've been outside their rules for years. They never bothered me until recently. I've kept my horses and trucks in check. No complaints. Honestly, I think they're just trying to make a point." "Honey, that's insane," she said softly. "Can you break through that fence? Maybe there's a way to drive around it or something." I paced and peered. On the side, it looked completely sealed. There was no path off the road to get around. If they nailed it down right, I'd have to take a saw to it, something I didn't have on me. "I'll come by with my old truck in an hour. Maybe we can use it as a battering ram," she offered. "Hang tight, and don't do anything rash without me, okay?" I nodded, even though she couldn't see. "Sure," I said. That gave me a moment to think. We were going to do something all right. They had to get this thing off. I ended the call and pocketed the phone. The morning had totally shifted. Now it felt like a personal war. The first time in years I was really angry with the HOA. I walked along the fence to survey any weakness. Everything looked fresh. No old nails, no weathering. I noticed a skinny piece of wood on the left side between two fence panels, and a glue-like brown paste on one of the posts, sloppily applied, meaning they wanted it up fast. "Probably the board's handyman," I murmured, imagining Mr. Allen from the HOA board supervising. He was a big talker, and had it in for me, always complaining that I had too many animals stirring dust. Maybe he had a hand in this. One thing was certain. Under no circumstances was I going to sit here and wait for the HOA to wave the wrong way. My family's property was being held hostage by a committee of people we barely knew, and it was my job to fix it. I turned on my heel, pulling my truck keys from my pocket. The plan now: get tools, tear down this barricade, and make sure the next time they mess with me they know who I am. As I walked to my truck, my mind raced through possibilities. Lawsuits and formal complaints could take months too slow. Already my stomach was clenched over what ifs. What if a fire happened, and my family needed to get out? This was a dangerous trap. No, I would solve it tonight. One way or another, this fence would come down. Rebecca showed up with her old 4x4, and a pair of big hammers. She parked a few yards down the ranch road from the fence, then came trudging up to me. I almost welcomed the company. Having an ally felt good. "Ready to make some noise?" I asked, forcing some bravery into my voice. She grinned, shaking her head. "I'll take a battering ram if we need it. But first maybe let's see if we can squeeze through like ninjas or something." We approached the fence together. I took the old lumber board I had in my truck bed, saw it fit in the side handhold, and used it to dig my fingers under the bottom chain links. "Whoa, that wire's got some give," she said. "Maybe we pull while I drive." "Drive into it," I yelled, and we pulled together. The chain link fence squealed as metal strained, but then with a mighty tug, a section popped loose from its fasteners. "Got it," I crowed, stepping back. I placed the board under my foot, and pushed one panel. It gave way a little. Rebecca jumped into the truck and revved, nudging forward. The board digging in front of the tire leveraged the panel just enough to pry 2 posts free of the ground with a crunch. "Shit, yeah," she shouted, grinning as she put it in reverse. On a second try, we popped another corner and part of the post. Then I clambered up with the hammers and removed nails, ripping slat after slat down. The panel we pried out came free, and the wood and wire crashed to the ground. The job took us 10 minutes. By then the sunrise was well up, and the cattle beyond stirred in confusion at the intrusion. The last piece of the fence fell with a satisfying clatter. We stepped through the opening, victorious. "We did it," Rebecca panted, breathing hard. "I can't believe it actually fell. How long did they think it was going to hold against us?" "Not long," I said with a smirk. The horses neighed as if relieved, and I felt their calm wash over me. I walked a few steps into the ranch, surveying the newly reopened road. Sunshine flooded the fields. Everything was exactly as it always had been. Except now, a second gate stood where theirs had been. A big steel one, still open. "You know what this means, right?" I said quietly, leaning against the gate. Rebecca looked at me, curious. "It means they got owned by 2 grown adults with a truck and some hammers," she said, chuckling. I shook my head but smiled. Then my grin turned sly. "No, it means now we run the show. If they try anything else, we'll put it back up. But next time, it won't be so easy." "Oh?" She cocked an eyebrow. "Oh yes. Just you wait." I looked down the road at the little sign we had ripped off, half hiding in the grass. I bent and picked it up. It read, "Private Road. HOA authorized construction." I raised an eyebrow at the official wording. They even apologized to themselves for stepping on my property. They had the nerve. I spat, crumpling the sign in my fist. "Careful now," Rebecca said. "You're about to go full redneck outlaw on them." I laughed and held up the sign pieces like a trophy. "Maybe I already have." She hopped back in the truck and winked. "Ride careful, John. Call me if they try any more stunts. But for now, congrats." The gates open again. I watched her drive off, head held high. Alone on the ranch road, I realized something important. It was like handing over the reins of war to me. I wasn't intimidated by the HOA anymore, and I was ready to take the fight to them. That night I couldn't sleep. The next morning before dawn, I was on the ranch road again. Only this time I wasn't alone. I had a plan. With the fence gone, I cleared some space near the gate and nailed a board between 2 posts. In big hasty letters it read, "Mills Ranch Private Road. Toll $5 per vehicle." Next to the board I set up a small folding table with a cash box and a handwritten price list. One of the gates was propped open just a crack, a stop sign attached below the toll sign. Anyone who drove through would see it immediately. By late morning, word had traveled fast. A few braver neighbors tried to drive around the toll by turning down a nearby dirt road, but they soon found it ended in my property anyway. Every car still came to my gate, horns honking like some ridiculous parade. I even recognized some of them. Karen herself passed by on her way out, saw the sign, and muttered something to herself. I just tipped my hat and let her go, her face a fire engine red. The town's kids found it hilarious too. At least 3 times I had cars stuffed with teenagers barreling down, and then laughing as they slammed on brakes. One girl took a selfie with me grinning in the driver's seat and posted it. "Toll collector John, on duty." They all waved at me through the window. One brave kid tossed in $1 with a grin and said, "Just paying my respects, sir." I felt like a local celebrity. A couple of talkative drivers quipped about this being the funniest episode of Horde of HOA they'd ever seen. The old pastor driving by motioned a blessing with a grin as he handed the fee through the window. Everyone was either laughing or crying on the inside, but the toll booth was a real show. The only comical conflict came from a grumpy beat-up sedan. The young couple behind the wheel decided not to stop and tried to swerve around the gate. They ended up throwing their car into a shallow ditch on my field. "Don't worry. No damage." I walked over, picked up the bill that fell out the window, and tossed them a rope, all in good humor. They scrambled out, cursing their GPS, and finally gave me the $5. Even the local authorities got wind of it. A sheriff's deputy showed up to investigate around noon, and I joked with him, explaining, "Just my right as a property owner, deputy." He smiled and said, as long as I owned the land, there wasn't much anyone could do about a voluntary fee. He left with a handshake, I couldn't help but giggle at the absurdity of all this. Around lunchtime I tallied my toll, about $50. Not exactly a fortune, but more importantly it was my money. I decided to reinvest it immediately. I hired old Hank down the road to help me gravel and smooth out the worst bumps in the driveway. I paid him with crisp 20s and told him this is from the community fund, boss. He cracked a grin. Turns out even he had to use the road. By early afternoon, the HOA board had officially lost their minds. I got a panicked call from Mr. Allen, who barked about lawsuits and summons, but I simply laughed and hung up. It felt incredible. I had turned their intimidation into my own advantage. Where they saw a petty homeowner, now they saw a guy in control of a private highway. I leaned back on the hood of my truck and watched cars drive out with a satisfied grin. Justice had never felt so sweet. A few hours later, I pulled my truck up to the small HOA office building. I had called an emergency meeting with the board members under false pretenses. My plan was to confront them, and maybe teach them a lesson they'd remember. The office door had a sign, Sunny Ridge HOA, board members only. I pushed it open and stepped into the stale air of the conference room. Seated around the table were the regular suspects. Karen Mitchell, red-faced and square-jawed, arms crossed. Mr. Allen rubbing his forehead. Linda Patel with a pen poised to write, and Mr. Johnson, looking confused. They all turned to me, shock on their faces as I closed the door behind me. Mr. Mills, Karen started, you said there was an emergency. There's a meeting in a few minutes with the highway engineer. Not sure. Put that on hold, I said, cutting her off. My voice was firm. We have an emergency right now. Maybe you noticed that I tore down your fence on my property. The room buzzed. They all scrambled, but no one knew what to do with my sign. Linda frowned and leaned forward. John, the fence was on an easement. Easement? I repeated. All I read was clear deed lines in the county office. There's no easement owned by the HOA across my land. Check the records, I dare you. Mr. Allen hurried over to the wall map. He pointed at a red line near where the fence had been. Our surveyor believes this area is common land. That's why we built it. I scoffed. Your trespassing sign, I said. Funny thing, I also got hit with a notice for using too much county gravel on my drive, and now an illegal fence on my land, supposedly to protect me or something. Care to explain that? The board members shuffled uncomfortably. No one looked me in the eye except Karen, who was tapping her foot nervously. She said, we might have jumped the gun, Mills. But that's what we thought, based on our survey. Jumped the gun? I echoed, incredulous. I had a survey done on my road 10 years ago. Back then, nobody questioned a single foot of it. Why do it now, and not discuss it? Was it because I refused your petty rules? Karen looked down. Mr. Johnson cleared his throat. Maybe it shouldn't have gone up like that, but the intent was safety. Safety, I spat back. Blocking off my only road isn't safety, it's hostage taking. Well, I fixed that. I nodded to Rebecca, who had sneaked in behind me. She locked the door and took a seat near the news camera. Karen ran a hand through her hair. Fine, she muttered. We'll rescind the fence and drop any claims. The road is yours. Fine, I said evenly. That's all I wanted. I left the room with my family, passing by a few reporters waiting outside the door. One of them stepped forward. Mr. Mills, how do you feel now that the road is officially yours? She asked into her microphone. I shrugged and gave her a grin. Relieved, to be honest. It shouldn't have had to come to this. But when someone tries to fence you in, you have to fight for your home. The reporter nodded and lowered her mic. The news crews packed up, and I climbed into my truck with my wife and kids cheering. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I caught sight of the board members watching from inside the office. Karen's jaw was clenched and she looked away quickly. I started the truck and turned to my wife, who was laughing with relief. Ready to go home? She smiled and said, road's all ours again. We drove down the open gate together, leaving the HOA office behind. I glanced at the billboard-style sign we had rolled up and shoved in the back. Tolls would become a funny story someday. For now, the only toll charged was the look on their faces. When I got home, I felt a new peace wash over the place. In a day we'd protected our land, and taught a lesson about respect. That night, I sat on the porch with my family, sipping lemonade, and listening to the frogs in the field. The toll sign was long gone. The road was clear. and we knew we'd never be fenced out again. I realized something important. Standing up for what's yours isn't a crime. And for once, the HOA knew whose land they were dealing with. You can't fence in a determined rancher without paying a toll of your own.